Welcome back to Previously Prohibited, episode 14. I'm Jenin Eunice here with my co-host Mel,
Hi,
and
guys.
today we have a very special guest, a friend of mine and also someone that Mel and I both know from Twitter, Anya Parampil. She is a journalist at the Grayzone and also author of Corporate Coup, Venezuela and the End of the U.S. Empire, which I believe came out last year, if I remember correctly.
Awesome. Real quick before we start, guys, if you could just smash that like button, hit the follow button. It really helps us in the algorithm. Leave a comment. We read all of the comments. We try to reply when we can. And yeah, so let's get started. Super excited to talk to you today, Anya. We wanted to talk to you about the Trump administration and specifically about Central and South America, the issues that we're going to be facing going into this administration. Trump has already indicated he's ready for a showdown with Panama over the Panama Canal. And then late last night, he tweeted or posted on Truth Social kind of threatening half of the world, half of our trading partners that are really important ones, with 100% tariffs if they would not commit to abandoning an alternative currency with their BRICS alliance. So what we wanted to get your takes on this. I know that's kind of a lot, but where do you see this going?
Well, the BRICS threats from Trump are particularly interesting because I would argue that BRICS is stronger or has become stronger in recent years, mainly due to Trump's behavior during his first administration, during which, and this is something that I talk about in the book, his administration transitioned from using hard military power the way that the Bush administration, for example, did in order to push the U.S. agenda internationally, and instead transitioned to this hybrid form of warfare where we see propaganda attacks in the media, dirty war tactics through the CIA, and, for example, what happened in Syria, though that wasn't totally Trump, but that was part of this transition away from overt military power to more covert tactics. And one of the main instruments in that hybrid war toolbook, which is something the U.S. uses to achieve its regime change goals abroad, is the weaponization of the U.S. dollar and sanctions. Trump's administration levied more financial sanctions against countries around the world than the Obama and Bush administrations combined. And while the U.S. could stand up and act as though it was in a very high, on a high horse or in a powerful position where it could bully other countries through its control of the financial system, a few years ago, now we see that alternatives, competitors with the U.S. model have emerged, and that's really what BRICS is about. It's because up to a third of the population of the world currently lives under some form of U.S. financial sanction, which is designed to make life so unbearable in these countries that they turn on their governments and overthrow what are usually more independent states and replace them with a sort of neoliberal puppet government that would do the U.S. and the IMF's bidding. And in relying so heavily on sanctions, it sent a message to the rest of the world that you really shouldn't rely on the U.S. dollar or solely SWIFT, which is the financial messaging center based in Switzerland. It's kind of like a post office, they say, for financial transactions. Any payment you make or any government or bank makes is sent through this system. Well, because it started obeying U.S. sanctions and refusing to service Iranian banks or North Korean banks, eventually, once the Russia sanctions came into play, even bigger questions of whether or not they would cut off Russian companies and Russian banks came up. All of this led to people just saying, look, forget about these systems. What about trading in our own domestic currencies? What about creating basket currencies? I have an interview in the book where I spoke with the deputy foreign minister of Russia, and he's been involved with BRICS and creating this alternative, what people say is a multipolar world, not just solely reliant on the pull of the US and Europe. And he said, not all of us as countries Iran, Syria, North Korea, whatever, Russia, we're not the same ideologically. The only thing that brings us together is basically defending ourselves against US sanctions. And so I don't think the same kind of aggressive posture is going to be the remedy here. What Trump's tweet is saying last night, the US is not in a position to tell these countries what to do, especially after the Russia sanctions, when Russia demonstrated that you can be cut off from the US financial system and still survive.
Yeah, real quick for people who don't know, BRICS is an acronym for Brazil, Russia, India, correct?
Yeah.
China and South Africa, right? Mm-hmm. So these are not little economies that we're talking about. These are not, kind of third world underdeveloped countries. These are mega, these are mega players. These are the largest economies in the world besides ours, right? And so when Trump is threatening them, and in his post last night, he threatened them. So basically what they want to do is they want to create an alternate system where they can store their money, right? So that we can't take it, we can't freeze it. And we saw, Russia learned that the really hard way when we stole money, or we took their money that they were holding in Western institutions, and we seized their assets, we seized everything, right? And they had absolutely no recourse whatsoever. So I think everybody, and I was really upset by that at the time, because it really did a lot of damage to American institutions, and the trust, right? So it's only natural for everyone, because at any point the US could, decide. Obviously, Russia's was a little bit extreme, is why it's, their actions, and that's obviously a totally different issue. But it's not as if we haven't been petty before, right? So that was obviously a major motivating factor for people to look for an alternative solution, and that's what these countries have done. And obviously, that's a great threat to the United States, because the reason that our dollar maintains basically that it's still so strong is because it's held by most countries as the reserve. They buy their debt in the US dollar. So if there's another option on the table for them to buy their debt elsewhere, that's a major threat to US hegemony. It is a major threat to our standing in the world, right? And it should make Americans very nervous either way, honestly, because eventually what's happening is the piper is gonna want to be paid, and we have kicked the can down the road in so many different ways, in ways that could devalue our dollar, devalue our currency, and that will hurt us as Americans as a whole, because we aren't going to be able to trade the way that we normally would have been able to if there is an alternative currency. So I understand the protectionism from Trump, but at the same time, it's just totally unrealistic, right? It's going to hurt us badly.
Yeah, and I was actually at the BRICS summit, not last year, but the previous year in South Africa, when they announced the expansion of BRICS to not only include those countries which you named that are in the original acronym, but it was 6 or 7 other countries, Argentina being one of them. They backed out because of Milei coming into power, but Ethiopia, Egypt, Iran, Saudi Arabia. And the reason those additions were so important was that it showed that not only, this isn't only, you're right that the US dollar as the world reserve currency is there because of how people buy and service their debt around the world, but also because of the petrodollar arrangement that we've had with Saudi Arabia since the 1970s, which basically says that Saudi Arabia will only accept US dollars to trade for its oil. And because of that, every country in the world, because Saudi Arabia historically dominated the oil market, needed a reserve of dollars. But now we've sanctioned the world's major oil producers other than Saudi Arabia, meaning Iran, Russia, Venezuela, and they are not able to even use dollars if they wanted to. So what position does that put India in when they want to buy oil for one of the fastest growing economies and tons of people there? they're not using the dollar because they're going to Russia, they're going to Venezuela, they're going to places that we thought we could sanction those countries and then apply our sanctions to the treasuries of foreign companies. That's how out of touch our Treasury Department became. We thought, oh, if we sanction Russia, that means India is not going to do business with them. Well, guess what? India is a sovereign country and they have needs. And so it's created this situation now with BRICS where the petrodollar is at risk because those countries, now Saudi Arabia is a part of that group, are not going to be trading in the dollar. They don't have that's what's so absurd about Trump's statement. We've cut many of the BRICS nations off from dollars. So how can we sit here and tell them that they don't have the right to trade in another currency? Right. They don't have a choice.
Right. Yeah. It's something I harp on all the time. I'm a big critic of Israel is the fact that when we sanctioned Russia, Israel chose not to join in those sanctions. And I truly believe that really emboldened countries like India and China to say, well, we're not going to abide. Not only are we not going to abide, but now because we're not buying this oil on the world market, we get a 20% discount. So why would, if your closest ally, your greatest ally, basically told you to kick rocks, why should we listen? And, I know that's not, obviously they can still do whatever they want, but it certainly set a precedent to basically flip us the bird. And we've seen that these sanctions don't work like they used to at all. People aren't afraid to flip us the bird anymore. Joe Biden was a very weak president in many ways. And so, yeah, and I think that Trump just really maybe hasn't he's underestimated the damage done. Started under him, but really accelerated under Biden. And it's almost like he's like, oh, let's just kick up the gas a little bit more. But so if he does that, 100% tariff on all of our goods, of course, they're gonna do the same to us.
I mean, luckily, one of the good things about Trump is he just says things, and then there's often very little follow through. So
he does, right? I know he's. I don't know. I feel like there's a lot going on in this administration already. Like it's even more chaos than I actually remember from 2017, which is kind of crazy to think about. But so he's got that going on. He's got a lot of fires to put out. I give him patience. But something that I do think is interesting is Panama Canal. Right. So let's talk about that. Jenin and I have talked about this before a little bit, but and we've already explained, I think it was like episode 2 or whatnot. I talked about the kind of lottery system that the Panama Canal instituted during their drought. And then they realized they could make a lot of money by selling slots to access. Right. And so right now they're offering China 5 slots, lottery slots a day, but essentially China, coming from China, but they're only offering the U.S. 4 lottery slots per day, and so it used to be that these it costs anywhere from like $17,000 I was reading up to about $200,000 to pass through the Panama Canal based upon the weight. But with these lottery slots, the prices can go up into the millions now to get one of these tickets. It's a golden ticket guaranteed to go straight through. And so obviously that drives up the price of goods because it drives up the price of transportation. So Trump is upset about that. He thinks that we're being taken advantage of. And now he is threatening military invasion, which technically the treaty that was signed when we handed over the Panama Canal gave the U.S. the right to military intervene if we deemed that the canal was not being governed in a neutral way. And that is their explanation. That is their justification. So I wanted to hear like what you thought about that.
I think that's a pretty good breakdown. I mean, it's as an American, it's kind of sad to hear our leaders talk about this because I do understand the argument of like, we built it and it was this amazing feat that we achieved decades ago, but I don't think we can coast on that forever. Right. The history of the world is that things change, countries lose things that they built, other groups take over. I mean, that that is to some degree just the way that the world works.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that it's helpful, this grand posturing with Panama. It's helpful. I do think that the Americas going forward, I do think the multipolar world is kind of inevitable, and that the Americas should be where we have the best relations. These are our neighbors. Right. Unfortunately, much of our policy as the United States toward the region has been defined by the Monroe Doctrine, which views Latin America, the Caribbean, as our backyard, kind of our stomping ground. The point of Monroe's Doctrine was to say, at the time when the Spanish colonies were winning their independence, that it was basically our manifest destiny to inherit Spain's role on the continent, not that those people in South America had the same right to independence that we did in the North. And I think the sooner we understand that actually our neighbors south of the border are very much like us, formed by basically identical histories, just different empires, European empires that we overthrew, and that they have the same mentality of wanting to be sovereign and in charge of their own affairs that we do, the faster we can have a reasonable policy with countries across the region. And when it comes to Panama and other countries in Central America, China's influence, again, has definitely risen in recent years, but as a response to our behavior, either our sanctions, our bullying. And so other countries, we can't just expect them to fall anymore. They will look to China. When we cut Venezuela off from arms supplies in 2006, Russia stepped in, and now their military is there. So that's the effect that our ridiculous policy has. And on Panama specifically, I just think that, having some sort of background negotiation would be the best way to resolve this.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's what this is about. Maybe Trump's just grandstanding in public because there is some sort of a discussion going on in the back, but it's actually just, I think, enraging Panama more than anything.
Right.
And in this situation, they have leverage, and I don't like our military being the leverage that we kind of depend on.
Yeah, I agree. Obviously, it should be last. I think that it's an extremely important issue. Obviously, I care significantly more about what's happening in Panama than I do what's happening, whatever threats Israel may face, although that is never seems to be prioritized for us ever. But so, yeah, I found this interesting, and I don't actually know what the solution is, because again, you've got also in Panama, it's the Darien Gap, correct? That's right at the bottom of Panama. And the last week we saw with the Colombian president, who they had their little, they had their spat, which was, I don't know, I'm weird. I thought it was hilarious personally, just all around, just bizarre. And, but he threatened to flood the Darien Gap, right? That was essentially what he said. We're going to overwhelm you, and that is a power move, right? And it has been done. We know it's been done. We know it's that Venezuela flooded Colombia with migrants, and then that was, they were kind of pushed upwards from there. Obviously, these poor people, I don't blame them. They're just pawns in this game, right? But yeah, I don't know what the easy solution is, because Panama doesn't seem to want to back down, and the Chinese have all the reason to back them up on this, right? They're benefiting greatly.
I think the age of the U.S. winning in the Americas through bullying and military tactics is over, because what happens if we interfere or if we have a war in Panama? You think the U.S. border situation is bad now? Like, we just have to get over talking like that and behaving this way, because those countries want to be sovereign, and they're not just going to bend to our will anymore. This isn't the 1950s.
Right.
I think it's also safe to say that, frankly, our ability to bully the entire world the way we have been for a while is waning. I mean, we've also lost, I think, our soft power, especially because of the situation in Israel, where we've basically supported or paid for a genocide. And I think most countries in the world don't really take us seriously anymore in any way, and just see us as a bully.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's the consequence, right? Of just being a bunch of jackasses all of the time and feeling like we have to fight everyone's fight, right? We've got to be involved at all times. Super frustrating. While our own infrastructure crumbles, while our own people suffer, while, we have, epidemics raging from obesity to drug addiction.
Fentanyl,
Yeah. So
I mean, and
what?
we all probably get criticized as like un-American or anti-American. I think we're all like very pro-American. We just don't like the
Right.
government and don't think the government is serving the people, and those are two completely different things.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah, I actually take great issue with anybody that would say that me worrying about everyday Americans makes me anti-American, I would challenge anyone on that assertion. But so what are some steps you think that he could take that would be positive?
In the region, well, today we see that his envoy for special missions, which is a pretty broad title, Rick Grenell, it has touched down in Caracas for what appeared to be direct meetings with the president, Nicolas Maduro. The president that is in charge of the country, not the president that we recognize. And this is where, when it comes to the region, our policy gets a little tricky because for the past 5 years, we've recognized a shadow government in Venezuela that now none of them even live in Venezuela. Edmundo Gonzalez, the man recognized, is like running all over the U.S. Sometimes he's in Ecuador, sometimes he's in Spain.
It's so bizarre, isn't it? It's like every time I think about this, it's like we like literally play this kind of fantasy game where there's this whole other government. Yeah. It's him and it's the Shah, right? The son of the Shah. That's also. Right. I'm like, why is this guy being given attention? Like, who is he?
Yeah, we always hear from the Shah on CNN. The Shah's son. I know. But what that recognition which Trump made in 2019 did was set the stage for the exact kind of theft that you described with Russia's bank accounts and Russia's assets around the world happened then first in 2019 with Venezuela. All of our banks seized their assets, including their sovereign gold supply. And in England, they've actually held on to billions of dollars worth. I mean, the price of gold keeps going up. So last I checked, it was $2 billion worth of gold that was stored in the Bank of England's vaults belonging to Venezuela. They asked to repatriate it in September of 2018, said we don't want our gold sitting in London anymore. And that was when this policy came where they recognized the shadow government and said, okay, we don't know who controls Venezuela, so we're going to hold on to this gold forever. It was a
interesting.
That happened in the UK, that happened here. And so now we're in the situation where after years of sanctions in Venezuela, where like their economy did deteriorate very badly, particularly between the years 2015 and 2017. A lot of people did go to Colombia and elsewhere. And then in 2021, when Biden came into office, one of the first acts he took within weeks was to offer temporary protected status, TPS, to Venezuelan migrants. So that's when all these people that were in Colombia or in Peru, which, by the way, they got to those countries and realized they're not much better than Venezuela. And if you're a migrant, they could be even worse. So they weren't living great lives in Colombia. And especially after COVID and the lockdowns, they devastated economies because people couldn't work. And if you're a migrant, the informal sector is basically where you make your living. They all came north. Biden basically said, if you are Venezuelan, this is the time to come here. And so that's why we saw this dramatic increase under Biden of Venezuelan migrants. And now that the Trump administration is attempting to, it's complicated because you know that like Biden was doing a lot of these deportations too. I'm not sure how much Trump is actually increased. Like, I don't think that the hardcore MAGA base would even be satisfied right now with Trump's deportations. They're kind of like out there in the media, but I don't think there's a substantial difference between what was happening before and now.
I don't.
That's my take too. Yeah.
I think right now he's doing what? I think he wanted to increase to like 1,800 a day. From what I was seeing, it was less than 1,000 last week. Was in the first week, less than 1,000 per day.
But we're in this situation now where it's one thing with Colombia or Mexico when we've tried these deportation flights and their governments refuse for whatever reason they want to have a confrontation with Trump. With Venezuela, we don't even recognize the government that has the authority to accept these planes or coordinate with us. So it's not a good situation if you're trying to repatriate migrants. And I think that that's something that's at the top of Rick Grinnell's agenda. But unlike with Colombia, where I don't think that Petro played his hand very well. I don't think I think it ended up being mostly an embarrassment for him.
Yeah, definitely.
And his country. Venezuela has leverage here because they can be like, well, you don't recognize us. You don't even officially say that we are the government that can accept this plane and coordinate with you on who these people are, who these our citizens are. You recognize this guy running around who has no control of a foreign ministry, no control of our borders. You're going to have to make a change here. And I would imagine that's the conversation that's going down. And I think that Trump could right a lot of his wrongs by just returning to normalization with Venezuela. They have the potential to be one of the powerhouses of the region. Largest untapped gold deposits in the world, largest oil reserves in the world. Russia and China and Iran and all of our enemies are there because of our policy of refusing to do business with them. And so, if we just recognize their government, I'm sure that they would be willing to do some business with us. And it's annoying to me that what gets in the way of a sensible policy with the country is the fact that there's just a base of Cubans and Venezuelans in Florida who are not putting actually America first. They're putting their own interests as basically their foreign interests, their interests of what they had back in their homeland first. They would like to see their friends and themselves return to power in these countries.
Right.
So they're not actually thinking does it make sense for the US to have an embargo on Venezuelan oil? No, we've done it since 2019. Everybody else is buying their oil. That just means that our price, especially after we sanctioned Russia, the price that we pay for oil went up as a result.
Right.
So does it make sense to score some ideological point against this regime that we hate? No, I don't think it does. But that's what happens when you don't have an America First policy. And I think it's time for Trump and others to say, those Latinos are going to vote for Republicans no matter what. Just forget about them. You don't have to cater your policy to this special interest group. That's a lot like the Israel lobby, by the way.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think just so real quick, the history, the U.S. we fell out with Venezuela in 1999, right? That was when Hugo Chavez came to power and he nationalized the oil industry, I believe. I'm not very knowledgeable on this, but I kind of remember. And so he took over Exxon, correct? And
Exxon out.
Right. So Exxon was an American company, correct?
Yeah.
And he confiscated their property. So a lot of our policy is basically was initially driven by this private company losing their butts in a foreign country. Now, I'm kind of like, you go do business in a foreign country, you kind of take that risk, right? I've always thought that if I go set up shop somewhere, and decide, I don't know, to make t-shirts in a foreign country, and then they decide to seize all of my assets one day, the U.S. government isn't coming to isn't going to sanction them, Bolivia, if I did that, right?
Especially if you were there, if your t-shirt company was based on stealing all of their t-shirts.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right. So, so just so people know, that's how it started. But of course, 1999, 2000 comes in, and you got Bush, oil, Texas. And that's what really kind of started this policy. And I think now we're, 25 years down the road, and most Americans literally have no idea why we don't like Venezuela. We just don't. They're just on the bad list, right? And I think it's time for Americans, everybody, to just kind of get over it. And deal with it. Look, there's no other issue other than this private company got their asses handed to them 25 years ago. And everybody just needs to get over it. That's my thinking. And it would be so much better. Obviously, it would bring down the price of energy. We would be able to we would have more trade, and we would not have so many immigrants coming looking for a better life. So
Exactly.
it's not that, oh, this is such an easy solution. Nothing is ever easy. Obviously, there's more to it than that. But at the same time, there are some things that it's just like, yeah, actually, it really is that easy. Like, you can just like stop being a bunch of a-holes, and you know,
stop having policy driven by ideology. We're not
Right.
going to reconquer these countries.
Yeah.
They're not just going to be overturned and replaced by some neoliberal figure. Even if you did succeed in that, there would be years of probably some sort of protracted civil war, and that's not what anybody should want.
I mean, it's the same problem that underlies, you can basically trace it to all of the terrible foreign policy we have, is this idea that America can go around and make governments in its own image, and that's going to work. And then we keep trying and failing. And for some reason, the neocons think that this works, the neocons and neoliberals now. Like, I don't know how you look at the situation that we have and think it's successful, but apparently some people are just completely delusional.
Well, it also goes back to the fact that it's all bullshit, right? Like, obviously, we don't care about democracy. We are friends with lots of countries that are not democratic whatsoever, but they
definitely don't care about human rights.
Right, but they play by our rules. As far as, you know, who they're going to sell their oil to, what kind of shares they take, all of, you know, stuff like that. And so I think that kind of underpins a lot of it too. And people are just tired of it because it's not even like we really believe this crap, right? No. That's just our excuse to make everybody feel good, to convince our soldiers to sign up to go die in the desert so that, you know, not so that private companies can steal oil and sell and make, you know, all this money. It's so that, you know, you can help girls go to school and stuff, you know, crap like that. So
no one believes that anymore.
Right.
And the Americas, I think, is the last place where, unfortunately, you have particularly conservatives, because of this group of people in Florida taking they can get America first when it comes to Ukraine. They're even waking up on the Middle East. Mm-hmm. But in the Americas, I think it's still a blind spot. We have this Monroeist attitude where it's like, well, we can still get our way there, without realizing that this is just a question of countries wanting to be sovereign, and it's 2025. You can't put the genie back in the bottle.
Yeah, I agree. And I do think it comes back to Americans just kind of being like this. It's just something people don't think about, right? I don't think that anybody that listens to this will have too many objections with what we're saying, because it actually is really reasonable. But I think that for the most part, people literally just forget that there's like this giant continent right down south from us, you know, and we just don't think about it because it's the Middle East for the last 20 something years. It's and speaking of the Middle East, real quick, Jenin has had some wonderful interactions for the last 24 hours. And I was wondering if you know anything about this organization, Anya, Batar.
She does.
I would say I don't know enough about it, except that like their leader is some sort of sexual harasser who posted revenge porn of a woman.
He's really, really hot. I have his photo here.
Yeah.
Very.
So Jenin, tell everybody what happened to you, because this was so nuts.
That's the wrong. Sorry. Okay.
That's the headline. That is his picture right under there.
Yeah. For some reason, I'm having trouble like scrolling.
He's like a thin.
Oh, it has to. Yeah.
He's like a thin Harvey Weinstein, I feel like.
Here it is.
There's a thinner. Yeah.
Just that chin is just really something. But that aside, I'll stop being catty.
Ross Glick.
So they're pretty insane, I would say. And they organized a counter protest for a vigil for a 5-year-old girl. Most people have probably heard of Hind Rajab, who was shot at by IDF soldiers, I believe, like 355 times right after calling for help. And the IDF had ostensibly coordinated with emergency services to rescue her. And while she was still on the phone, you know, all of this is recorded. They were talking her through it. And then the IDF shot the emergency responders and her. So there was a vigil for this in Zuccotti Park, the 1-year anniversary of her death. And this Beitar group thought that it was not only appropriate, but a good idea to organize a counter protest, like a protest for a vigil, and said they were going to use the occasion to find terrorist supporters who aren't citizens using like facial recognition technology and stuff and report them to the Trump administration to deport them. And as a little more background, Trump has recently this week issued a couple additional executive orders, basically ordering agencies and institutions of higher education to do more to combat anti-Semitism, which, as we all know, means anything that criticizes Israel, and has explicitly directed them to monitor non-citizen students and staff very closely to make sure they're pro-Israel enough. This should strike anyone as like really creepy. So this organization is using that and sending lists to the Trump administration of people they believe should be deported. So I started calling them out. They actually offered, there's a woman who's a pro-Palestine activist in New York named Nird, I forgot her last name now. I only know her vaguely through Twitter. Nardine, yeah. So they had offered someone $1,800 to give her a pager, which we know what that means, like kill her. Right. And I said, this is not First Amendment protected speech. That's, first of all, it's incitement to violence. That's a direct threat. And you're actually committing a crime just by saying that, because you're offering somebody money to commit murder. That's like conspiracy. That's the first step in conspiracy to commit murder. That's a crime. And so then they started going after me. They did a similar tweet about me saying, like, I should get a pager too and be deported. I'm a U.S. citizen. My mom is a U.S. citizen. Like, I was born a citizen, but whatever. Okay. And then found my phone number online, which turns out it's way too easy to find. but I was slightly relieved they didn't manage to like get it through Twitter, probably because that freaked me out that Twitter might have given them access. So then they just started calling me nonstop. They called me probably 30 times yesterday, just like one time after the other, leaving messages. I think I have one here. Hang on.
And this is like it's a Jewish organization. It was founded in Israel, right? But now they have U.S. chapters, right? They recently opened up these, and it's just like a solidarity organization, right? It's like doesn't actually have any real purpose.
No, their mission statement is to like it's very long, and it's actually like advance Zionism and stop anti-Semitism. It's all, it's clearly bullying. I'm not, even though they're like death threats, I'm not like actually extremely worried, because I think they're probably all talk. But I called the FBI. A lot of people have been reporting them to GoFundMe. Oh, because they're raising funds on GoFundMe with the stated message it's to put hits on people. Like, that's a crime. During COVID, GoFundMe froze the accounts of the Canadian truckers who were protesting vaccine mandates. But these guys, their GoFundMe account is just fine. And why isn't Twitter doing anything about it? Like, these are actual crimes. These are the things where I'm like, okay, no, that's not free speech. That is where there should be law enforcement involved. But I guess they're too busy, like, I don't know, investigating students for saying from the river to the sea to actually care about this. I'm so mad.
It is shocking. And Beitar, everyone should report them, because there needs to be a record for law enforcement of everything that they're doing to you and to others.
Yes. Oh, and just so you guys know, I actually had a fantastic man reach out to me. This guy's got like almost 1 million followers on TikTok. His name is Daniel Tobin. He reached out to me, asked if he could forward me some emails. So he wrote these fantastic emails to the Attorney General of New York, to the mayors, to the universities. He actually created a really great paper trail, I thought, in which he brought attention. He used the links. He says, I'm writing to bring to your attention a deeply concerning incident involving threats of violence made by members of a registered nonprofit, Beitar US, against students on the new school campus. As someone who values safety and integrity of educational institutions, I believe it is critical that this matter be addressed promptly and thoroughly. And then he, and so and he included all the links and whatnot. But this is the kind of stuff that his emails, if something does happen, something, heaven forbid, the authorities are on notice. They have received, they know that this group is threatening people. They were trying to recruit Hell's Angels and Proud Boys.
And then they tagged the wrong Proud Boys, and it was like a gay activist group, jokingly called them. It had a rainbow as its profile.
My favorite part was they were like tagging ICE, right? And then I go to that Proud Boys thing, and their pinned tweet is F ICE, like written like 50 times.
So funny.
I was
So
like,
here,
something tells me they're not going to come to your ICE
No.
deportation party.
here they are bragging about how they have tax exempt status, which, like, I'm really not sure how you get tax exempt status to threaten people to kill them, which
That's
seems
all
to be
they
mainly
are.
what they do. Yeah.
All they do is
Yep.
dox college students.
Yep.
Yeah.
And, you know, they're an old group. I think they may have even been founded before Israel, because they were basically central to helping establish the state.
Okay.
I would say keep an eye out on the Grayzone, because my colleague Jeremy Lafredo is going to do a documentary, like a little short report about them. He went to their counter protests and actually interviewed some of these violent individuals. And he tweeted or posted on X that Beitar youth in Poland in the 1930s were out in the streets chanting "Poland for Pilsudski, Germany for Hitler, Palestine for Jews." This is a group they're all just about furthering the cause of Zionism, which I mean has, you know, historically been linked to terror activity in the past.
Right.
I mean, between the Jewish Defense League or any of the groups that were responsible for bombings in the lead up to the foundation of Israel. Like,
So this is would you say this is like a direct descendant of that? Or I thought they were just like using the name because, you know, like almost mimicking it from the past.
I'm actually not sure. I thought that like what Mel said, that there were branches that formed, or maybe there was the initial pre-Israel group, and then the group that was founded once Israel was established, and that they've kind of expanded since then. But that's their ideological and historical lodestar, I guess.
I see.
Yeah. I was seeing this particular one, this Beitar US. It actually just got its NGO status, or not NGO, but nonprofit status in September, I believe. It applied in July and it got it in September, which seemed really fast to me, but whatever. And
I'm not. Yeah.
all of a sudden, no. You know, they've got like 10, 12,000 followers on X that they just formed. They just started that page in September. So for whatever, clearly it was set up for a reason, right? Like, and it's, my guess is that it's probably is in a direct response to try to intimidate college students, right? This was part of a plan. We're going to have this group. We're going to fund this group. I think that it's something called the Blue Network, right? Which is the massive network of pro-Israel kind of Jewish organizations within the U.S. that are tasked with all kinds of things in ways to influence not only policy, but also to intimidate Americans who speak out against U.S. policy with Israel. So they're
actually calling me now. They've literally been calling. Should I answer it?
Why not? Answer it. Yeah.
Hello? Hello? Yeah, hi. Hello? It's like not working. Yeah?
I wish she could forward that to me.
Hello?
This call will be recorded.
Hello? I don't know. For some reason, it's not going to speaker. I don't know if they have it set so I can't put it on. Is that possible?
That's so odd.
Oh, wait. Hang on.
I totally wanted to hear one of those freaks.
Me too. I wanted to play it for everybody. But
yeah.
Have you gotten your voice recorded on anything, or like in the voicemails?
So they haven't left voicemails, but they leave these odd. It goes like this.
Like text voicemails or something?
Yeah.
Text voicemails, yeah. And then so it says I don't know if you can see that. They deposited a message. But only one actually showed up. Oh, here it is. I don't know if you can read this.
Yeah. So, what is that phone number at the bottom? Did you click that?
No, I was afraid to. I was afraid it might be some kind of.
Right. So when I clicked it, he's like, don't do that. But it's like said it was going to direct me to a voicemail. So I didn't know if that was actually their phone number.
Interesting.
that they sent, but I don't know. I guess I should have
it
looked
from a Skype number.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, I do think it is too long for a regular phone number. So, or unless that's actually a country code, I don't know. Anybody know?
Yeah.
Anybody knows?
972, that's Israel.
No, okay, it's not. Yeah.
I mean, I'm just gonna save everything. Hopefully, at some point, someone will take this seriously because it's just really not okay. But
yeah. It's sad that they've been emboldened, sadly, by Trump and these ridiculous attacks on free speech.
Well, and they're clearly being emboldened by the fact that like law enforcement isn't doing anything, tech people aren't doing anything. I mean,
yeah, it's super frustrating with Trump too, because he's been accused of anti-Semitism probably more than just about anybody. So to see him kind of like go into this, and kind of like, oh, I'm going to make up these special rules. And I'm like, you do understand that like it will be used. These things will be used against your supporters, right?
Yeah.
Like just 6 months ago, it was a group of Jewish Americans who put your face on the cover of the New Republic magazine or whatnot. And they stylized you as Hitler, okay? So you have been accused of being Hitler more than probably anybody in the world. So certainly you can understand where we should not empower people to weaponize this accusation anymore, right? But
this isn't coming from him, I don't think. I mean,
well, I still hold him just as responsible as I held Joe Biden. At the end of the day, he's the one signing the freaking thing. We all noticed that he certainly didn't make a big deal out of signing this one the way he did all the others. We didn't get a special assignment of the pen. Surely it got mailed to old Miriam. But he was real quiet. He didn't talk about it in his press conference. There was no grand thing about it. All the same, it doesn't matter. He still did it. And it would have been really nice. I'm like, people keep saying, well, he owes Miriam for the $100 million. I'm like, this is a man that has declared bankruptcy 3 times. Okay. He is not shy. He's okay with walking away from debts. Okay. Like, I don't understand. He's not running for re-election anymore. I would tell that old hag, to get lost.
That it's time for America first.
Yeah. Right. Sorry, you're living in the old embassy. And that should have been worth $1 trillion. Yeah, as far as I'm concerned.
Are there going to be legal challenges to this, Jenin? I'm sure there must be.
Of course, there will be. I mean,
will it stand?
I really doubt it. And that's sort of my more optimistic take is he, or at least his legal advisors, know that this stuff is not going to stand up in a court of law. So he's like, okay, I'll just do it. I'll make them happy. I mean, where the president matters much more. I mean, I don't want to say he doesn't matter at all with domestic policy. Of course he does. But foreign policy is kind of the most important part because it's very hard. You can't really get courts to restrain the president's foreign policy actions. I mean, very, very, very difficult. So my optimistic read sometimes is like, okay, he's like, I'll do this because, there are courts that aren't going to uphold it, but I'll do what I want when it comes to the ceasefire in Gaza. I mean, we'll see what happens there. But
what is your take, Anya, on the
Wyckoff?
Well, really on Egypt and Jordan right now, because he's trying real hard to force them. What do you think is going to happen?
I think there's a great irony that the America First president who ran on securing U.S. borders and deporting illegal migrants would force any country to take people that should have their own land and do have their own land that they were kicked out of. And unfortunately, I do think that after what happened in Gaza, I don't see the scenario that I see playing out is that they force Egypt and Jordan to accept people, and that probably Jared Kushner gets to rebuild a good portion of the Strip. I don't see it happening any other way. Sadly,
I mean, it's uninhabitable, and it's not going to be
right.
I mean, I don't know what you can do if you want to live there. And apparently, I mean, I don't know if this is true, but Wyckoff, the envoy, was there yesterday, I think, and he was saying like there are, explosive devices that can be
right. But They said it would take a couple years just to remove the unexploded bombs that had been dropped, because they were dropping such old bombs, right? Because they were just, digging the bottom of the barrel everywhere that they could. I think somebody said that they were dropping bombs from like Soviet era bombs from like the 70s at one point, which is just so ridiculous on so many
They
levels.
ran out of everything else.
Right.
But it's not a genocide.
No, I mean, it was a genocide. It's clearly an ethnic cleansing. It was clearly designed 100% to make Gaza uninhabitable, right? I will say this, if nothing else, the people who inhabit Israel, they can play a long game. This is a 20-year project now with all of the bombs and whatnot dropped. Obviously, we can't expect the people of Gaza to wait around for 20 years, but they should be moved in. I think they should actually just be given the chance to live in Israel, as far as I'm concerned. Or the Negev Desert, and I think I'm saying that right. At no point should they be forced upon Egypt or any other country, right? For a variety of reasons. But one thing I do think that is in danger is if they do that is a destabilization in Egypt, especially, which is already kind of a shaky government because of dissatisfaction and because of really high rates of poverty.
Egypt and Jordan are pretty much failed states that just subsist upon being our enablers in Israel. They're completely destroyed vassal states, and Egypt, it's a tragedy, really. My opinion is that Jordan to the sea should all be Palestine. Jordan's not a real country. But actually, also another solution, I think, is that they could put all the Israelis in Ukraine, since that's where they're from, a lot of them, and we destroyed Ukraine, so maybe that would be the best.
That'll go over.
A cold day in hell, I think, is what they say. But I do think that destabilizing these two countries like this, right? And I hate to talk like that, because of course that's always the Israelis talking point. Why does nobody want them? As if, Americans will say that as we're like, bitching about having to take in a couple million migrants, and we're, 30 times the size of Jordan.
Yeah, why is Jordan, why do Jordan and Egypt, why do they have a responsibility to take them? Why can't they just be in the land that they are from and where they want to be? I mean, that's the one question that those MAGA Zios will never answer for.
Right.
Kirk and whatnot. They'll just,
because the Bible says it's for the Jews. That's why.
Right. Well, it's very frustrating, because I'm like, hey, actually, I don't want to take in the world's refugees in America. Right. And so I don't expect other countries to do the same. Right. I expect us to not wage war. I expect us to not supply Israel with enough bombs to, in fact, destroy 90% of the infrastructure in a city and render 2 million people homeless. These are not big requests, I don't think. And so what's going to happen is that they're going to destabilize the countries by forcing all these millions of pissed off immigrants in. And how does that make Israel any safer? Even if you cared about Israel, right? Like, let's say I love Israel. How is Israel safer by doing this? They're not.
Yeah.
Right? Because Israel wants to expand into Jordan and Egypt too.
Yeah.
Like, they're happy if it's destabilized. It's always just pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing, because that's moving Israel's goalpost. They want to go into the Sinai next.
Really?
Greater Israel includes a lot.
Yeah. Do you think they're going to expand into Lebanon?
I honestly, I don't know if they can, because they weren't, for all the destruction they did in Lebanon, they weren't successful in holding ground, and they can basically bomb a lot, but then staying in holding territory in Lebanon, I think, is more complicated. But I unfortunately think that the U.S. will probably do everything it can to weaken Lebanon even further. I mean, Lebanon was not in a good position 5 years ago. Their economy, everything is collapsing. This only makes it worse, and they're not even in a position to defend themselves, except for the existence of Hezbollah. So I don't know. I think that Israel's goal is to always take as much as they can. And now they have Syria too, which is that's a lot of this I think was about. The Gaza war was about Gaza, but internationally weakening Russia, getting them involved in Ukraine, they actually moved a lot of their military equipment that they had in Syria out. That set up the stage for Israel to do what it did just very suddenly at the end of the year last year. And it shows that this is a very global chessboard, right? You can never just focus too much on one conflict because they're all connected.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Super, super frustrating to, I'm an isolationist, hardcore, like hardcore. So, well, that was awesome. Thank you so much for coming on and talking with us.
Thank you so much, Anya. That's so fun.
So much knowledge. Yes.
Yeah.
And we will talk soon, hopefully. Yeah, because you know about everything. If you don't follow Anya on X, she's hilarious.
You should you got to come to the DMV, Mel, and do like an in-person event.
Yes.
That'd be so fun.
Yes, I know. Oh, good heavens. See, but here I can edit. We can edit out if I say anything.
You don't need to be edited.
I know. Just earlier, I was like, we got to do some live streams. And then as soon as I sent that, I was like, oh.
You never know what you're going to get in trouble for on live streams.
Yeah. The good news is I mostly don't care. I think the wonderful thing about being an early Trump fan is that you just got this really thick skin to being called every terrible name in the book that you just don't care anymore, And so that's good. Yeah. So, all right. Well, we will talk soon.
Talk to you later.
Bye, guys.
Bye.